Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone's going to have a great weekend. It's Friday. I'm doing a VR response for our buddy Dylan over at Double D Vintage. He has a video response going on right now for showing us cards that go together. Now, I will preface this. I may take a little bit of flack from the community for doing this one. This is not meant to point any fingers, but it's just supposed to kind of retell or revisit the story of the steroid era. Starting with, in 2002, Ken Caminetti was interviewed and released an article in Sports Illustrated indicating that he had used steroids during the course of his season when he won the MVP, I believe, in 1998. And later on, Jose Canseco, who was kind of at that point, he considered to be kind of being kicked out of baseball because nobody wanted to sign him in 2002, announced he was going to be writing a tell-all book about his use of steroids, which he openly admitted using, and also was going to name names. So there was a lot of anticipation growing with that. So I'll kind of put these off into the corner now. We're going to leave Jose up in the corner here because he's going to be revisited here in a minute. But before his book was released in the 2002, the federal government started investigating the Balco labs in the Bay Area, and in 2003 discovered evidence suggesting that Barry Bonds, Gary Sheffield, and Jason Giambi were all using steroids purchased by Balco, which then in turn to them being actually investigated, being interviewed as part of the federal investigation of Balco, of which Jason Giambi admitted to using at that hearing. Gary Sheffield more or less admitted to it, and Barry Bonds said he didn't knowingly use anything and indicated that he did use a cream but had no idea that there were steroids in it at that time, and that he insists his innocence to this day. As a result of those growing momentum, there was actually a growing need to actually have a federal investigation into this, or actually there was actually a Senate hearing that was called, at which time, actually right before this, Jose Canseco was able to actually finish his book, and he named the following players as steroid users in his book: Rafael Palmeiro, Mark McGwire, Ivan Rodriguez, and Juan Gonzalez. There was other names named, but these were the big names that were named by Jose Canseco. Clearly, he took a lot of flack by the players for being so open about this and sharing his stories of their use, of his use, and helping these people use during his time in baseball, that clearly he was on the outs with the baseball community, and brought some attention to players that obviously didn't want that attention on him at that time, of which these two are the only two that have continued to insist that they never used, and one of which is actually in the Hall of Fame at this point. That'd be Ivan Rodriguez. Make your own judgments on this one. Later on that year, actually, we did have the hearing in Washington in which Rafael Palmeiro, Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, Curt Schilling, if I can fit him in here, and Frank Thomas were all invited to be able to testify. Let's move this one up here so we can do it here. Get them all in there so you can see the cards. Here we go. Curt Schilling was actually, and Frank Thomas were asked to testify because they were very adamant against the use of steroids in baseball and wanted it out. Curt Schilling decided not to say anything because he said he had nothing beneficial to add. Frank Thomas didn't actually come in person. He did a video, or at least a live stream of some sorts from spring training, but the video feed was terrible and no one could really hear what the heck he had to say, which kind of left these three actually having to answer to a bunch of senators and congressmen about the use of steroids in baseball. At that time, Sammy Sosa, Rooney more or less said that he wasn't comfortable answering questions in English at that time, so he actually didn't make a comment at all. Rafael Palmeiro was adamant that he didn't use and that he was being slandered. Mark McGwire more or less said, I wasn't here to talk about the past, but I'm here to talk about the present, and just avoided the questions in a different way. Well, later on that year, Rafael Palmeiro tested positive for the use of steroids. He was suspended and pretty much tarnished his legacy up to this point because he's obviously not going to be in the Hall of Fame, even though he's got Hall of Fame numbers for sure. So that was the end of Rafael Palmeiro's. Hall of Fame chances at that point. Art McGuire later admitted to using when he was trying to get back in baseball's good graces so he could be a hitting coach. Sammy Sosa never admitted to it, but he's kind of treated as if he did. So I don't know if that's fair or not. I think that's not for me to really to be able to decide. So because of that hearing, the Major League Baseball actually announced that they were going to be doing the Mitchell report at that point, where they announced that they were going to be doing their own investigation. I don't know if it was as a result of the hearing or as a result of the hearing being called, but either way, they were going to say they're going to take care of it themselves. So obviously they talked about some of the interviews of Canseco and some of these other people that were named, but the big name that kind of came out of that we didn't know about was Roger Clemens. So it was Roger Clemens and Andy Pettitte were using the same trainer, which was Roger Clemens' personal trainer. Roger Clemens' personal trainer was allegedly admitting to giving steroids to both of these players. Andy Pettitte did admit to they used it when he was recovering from injury at that point, and he later regretted, but he did come clean immediately. And Roger Clemens continued to maintain his innocence and said that he was being slandered by this individual, and actually I think pursued legal proceedings against him while also maintaining his innocence during that time. Anyway, as a result of it, he and like Barry Bonds are kind of two players that obviously were maybe the best players of that era. If you look at their number of MVPs and Cy Youngs, are still out on baseball's outs, and to the point where they obviously weren't voted in by the writers, and actually the Veterans Committee just this past year decided that neither one of them were going to get enough votes to be able to get in either. And then finally you've got this group of players, big stars, that happened after all this happened, also ended up getting caught after the fact, which they actually had larger penalties to pay as a result of it. And I'm going to kind of point out some of them to you here, which we have Manny Ramirez, I believe, was the first one of this group of four that I have here. Then we had, I believe it was maybe Ryan Braun first, who actually got out of an alleged positive test because said he was able to make an argument that the test results were mishandled, put the blame on the testers, didn't admit to it, and then he later tested positive anyway. So then he kind of then just accepted his consequences and kind of just was quiet for the rest of his career while he finished up in Milwaukee. Then we had Alex Rodriguez, who probably put up the biggest defense and tried to throw many of his teammates under the bus at this time. I know he's been trying to work on his image since that time, but I can only imagine like how difficult that's been for a lot of the players that he played with. Because of how adamant he didn't use, was putting the blame on other people and trying to throw them on their bus, all the while knowing that he actually had tested positive, he was using. He's had to do a lot of atonement, and I think he has, in order to be able to start getting back on TV and doing broadcast and things like that, but it's something that's definitely forever tarnished his legacy and has also kept him out of the Hall of Fame up to this point, as well as Manny Ramirez. And then finally, the most recent big star that had multiple positive tests was Robinson Cano. All right, so I know it wasn't the most positive video. I wasn't meaning to be negative about it either, but it was just a point in time in my life where I thought my innocence around baseball was a little bit lost when all these players that were the stars of my childhood and early adolescence were testing positive left and right. And I think I to speak for many baseball fans where we kind of felt a bit duped, even though we loved it when it was going on as far as like them breaking records and winning awards, but really felt kind of misled. And I think eventually drew me towards the players that for the best part of our knowledge didn't use, and made me want to celebrate some of those players even more as a way to be able to reconcile my love of baseball with my hatred of like hearing about this adamant cheating. But again, like cheating is nothing new in baseball, and players have been trying to get a leg up on their competition for many, many years, including even the steroid use of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s. Not steroids, but amphetamine use by the players, including many of which are in the Hall of Fame. So, I try not to place any judgment on these individuals and just kind of share the facts and just share sort of how I felt personally. So that is my video response. Hope you all have a great weekend. I'll be back soon with another video.